Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Let's get rolling.
All right, let's crank up the size here so you guys can see stuff. Do it for this one too. Make everything nice and big. The people like me who are old. There we go. All right. So, hi, I'm Dana Robinson. I am the director of software engineering at the HDF Group, and so today I thought we'd talk about some releases as we're approaching HDF5 114's release date, and this is going to potentially, after that, is going to turn into HDF5 2.0, which is a bit of a break of 25 years of tradition. So we should probably have a little chat about that and what it's going to look like going forward. So anyway, this is the release schedule. We're looking at the GitHub page, is our main GitHub repository for HDF5. And we have this release schedule that we put right here, right in the repository, so that you can see what we think we are going to release. And of course, everything in the future may be science fiction, but we do try to hold to this to a certain extent. Like these things that I have out here in 2023, a lot of this is tentative because we'll have to see, right? But once we actually have identified features and we say that this release is going to come out, and we have a little matrix down here, and we say that we're going to release this at a certain time, then we try to hold to those dates so that people can reliably know when features are about to arrive. So if we look at what we have here, we just released 113.3. That went out just yesterday. So we did make our October deadline, as we put on the little chart here. The next one that comes out will probably be 114.0 in December. And I'm targeting code freeze for that first week of December so that we can kind of get our stuff together and get out the door in mid-December, and then nobody has to do releases over Christmas, which always is awful. So, and then that will start the 114 line. So as a reminder, the 113 branch these are experimental releases. These are essentially glorified release candidates. They're release candidates that we put through the process so that they make binaries. We treat them basically like a release, but essentially there's no support for 113 after it turns into 114, because these are just the release candidates for this. And we don't, in these versions here, 113, 1, 2, and 3, there's no guarantees of binary compatibility or even file format compatibility between these. This is as you get to test stuff out as we're developing the new features. You're helping make the sausage, right? So this is not something that you should be using for production. So once we release this, when this comes out here, one of the things that we've always wanted to do is reduce the number of branches that we have, because right now we're maintaining, this is our main developed trunk, and then we also have these 3 maintenance branches, and it is a big pain to push all the changes that we make down to 3 maintenance branches. Even though 1.8 we don't really maintain as much because it differs so much from 110 and 112. So this kind of, we move CVEs here, we and some other security fixes, but for the most, and CMake changes, but for the most part, we leave 1.8 alone. It soldiers on. So what we plan to do in terms of retirement is 1.8.23 will be the last release of 1.8, sometime in January. 112.3 will be the last release of 112 sometime in February. And the reason we're retiring 112 so early is that 112 has an incompatible VOL, virtual object layer interface. And so we don't want to support this going forward because you really can't make a proper pass-through connector with 112. So we're retiring it early, and 114 is what 112 should have been. So we're gonna cut this off, and people should, if you don't need the VOL, you can use 110, or you can move to 114. 110 is tried and true. It's been out for many years now. So it's a good place to go if you're nervous about moving to a .0 release when we bring a 114.0 out. So and then we'll probably do a spring release of 110. And 110 I intend to carry forward for at least a year. It'll probably, I imagine it's probably going to soldier on until HDF5 2.0 comes out, whenever that is. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, so by the time we get to spring, we should have dropped these two. 114 should be alive and well, and 110 should be soldiering on. Now, 114.1, when are we going to bring out a .1 release? Unclear. It depends on the number of issues and their severity that we find in 114.0. If there's something that's important, we'll bring it out in and we'll bring this out earlier. Otherwise, this may be out in the summer. I've just been informed today that there are potentially some collective data type conversion functions that we want to add to the library. So and these apparently are required for some ECP stuff. So we may be doing 114.1 in the spring because there's not enough time to get these things into 114.0. And so that may change this. This 110.10 may go a little bit later. One of the reasons we want to get a 110.10 out is we've made some performance improvements to the library that have moved into 110, but they have not been released yet because they were done here in the summer and have not moved in yet. And so that's one of the people were slow to move from 1.8 into 110 or 112 because there were all these perceived performance in regressions. And that was true for 110.0 when that first came out. That was a big, I wish I had that graph. I should have grabbed that. But there was you could see there's a big bump in how long it took to do things in the library. And so we fixed most of that actually slowly over the years. That has changed to now where 110 is pretty close to 1.8 in terms of performance. So we've come quite a long way. The features that we have that are coming out in 114.0 are the onion VFD and the selection IO and subfiling were released in 113.2. Has been out for a while. 113.3 introduced multi-data set IO. So multi-data set IO allows you to spread your IO across multiple data sets and just a single MPI type. So MPI can do smart things with it. Subfiling is basically IO concentrators. So you can have set up an IO concentration scheme so that instead of, so it's a compromise between file per process and single shared file. So it allows you to decide the granularity of that. So those were ECP. In fact, I feel like a lot of what we've done over the past year or so in terms of the 113.3 releases has really been about delivering a bunch of ECP features. And that's really what 114 is really all about, is supporting the ECP program. And then going forward, so we have this, drop this down here so I can click on it here. So I had this post that I put out here. What do you want to see in HDF5 2.0? Make this a little bigger. And it's got some ideas on here, a lot of stuff about Unicode, a couple other like random things. People talk about multi-threaded stuff. That's a very popular topic on here. But we're still trying to identify exactly what it is we're going to put into HDF5 2.0. It's complicated. The resources that we'll have available to put into things is a bit unclear. I have my own priorities that I think we should focus on first, but this is really, HDF5 is a community resource, and so we're seeking other people's input on things that they think would be particularly helpful to them. And so we're starting to work on this now. We've had a couple of meetings on this, and it's going to be a process, and we'll hopefully have a solid set of things that we think we're going to put into HDF5 2.0 in, I'd imagine probably in the spring. Once we get HDF5 114 out the door, then I think that's going to be when we're really going to finish the feature set. And we've got a document. I can share this to anybody who's interested in working on this. We're not doing this entirely in front of everybody because I don't really have a good venue for that. But this list is not a big secret. We're just trying to figure out what sorts of things we could put in there. And one of the things that I feel is really important is semantic versioning. Is we're actually going to start doing, we're going to do the thing we're supposed to do and do major, minor, patch version numbers. That's one of the things that we absolutely have to do. And I want to make HDF5 2.0 to be part of it. It's focused to be an API, not reset, but to clean up some stuff that we've been kind of carrying around for a very long time. Just some stuff like, there's a few functions we have that return memory allocated library, which is not how the vast majority of the library works. We should unify that. There's some things that return kind of random values, random types, like, whether sometimes we return integers, sometimes we return HRT, sometimes we return HIDT values. And I want to unify that to every API call returns an HRT or an HIDT identifier. So I mean that will mean that people's code will have to change, but we don't have a lot of API calls that return non-HRT or HIDT IDs. So it's not that big of a change. But I want to have kind of a more uniform API. I do want to start removing the things that we've claimed are deprecated for years. So that means things like H5D open 1 and H5D open 2 will condense down into just H5D open. We'll keep the macro scheme because we're going to need that in the future as we have to deal with various versions of API calls in the future. But I do want to get rid of a lot. Now that we've gotten to H5O get info 3, I think it's about time we can start retiring some stuff. Otherwise, we're going to wind up with like H5O get info 12 at some point, and that's just going to be silly. So I do want to kind of go through and just kind of clean up some things that have been around for a long time. And I feel like that, to me, is one of the things that it's not difficult to do. It's a little bit of community pain. I don't think it's too bad. But that's one of the things I think is definitely going to be in HDF5 2.0. And then other stuff is kind of on the fence. Like when do we have the resources to do it? Also, what's the frequency at which we release major versions? We've had some long gaps between minor versions in the past, but 1.8 to 1.10 was something like 8 years. It was very long, and so we don't want to do that. That was quite long. So but at the same time, I don't want to have so much API churn, so much versioning churn that people become frustrated with using HDF5 that they constantly have to update their software in ways that are breaking. So we'll see. This will be something that we have to kind of figure out together going forward. But I feel like it's important for HDF5 to keep up with the ever-changing data landscape. And a part of this is going to mean iterating more frequently than we have in the past. But at the same time, trying to make it so that people aren't annoyed by us constantly changing things. We're trying to be smart about this, try to balance the stability needs versus the needs for new things. So that's kind of like what we're thinking about in terms of HDF5 2.0. And then part of the changes that I want to make, and some of this could be even done in 1.14.0. One of the things that I've thought about doing is we currently maintain 2 build systems, which is kind of annoying for something that's as complicated as HDF5, especially as we're starting to add more complicated features in that require more complicated testing setups. And maintaining these 2 things in 2 different build systems is really, really hard. And we've struggled to maintain parity between the 2 build systems, especially going across Unix systems isn't too bad. So if you've got POSIX systems like supporting Mac and supporting various flavors of Unix, or even more oddball systems like Solaris isn't too bad, but Windows is also really challenging. And so I want to reduce some of this complexity, and I think that the thing that has to go is the auto tools, because CMake supports Windows and the auto tools really don't, not in a nice way. So in the past, I think people were more auto tools heavy, especially our heaviest users. I feel like that has solidly shifted now to where a lot of stuff uses CMake. And so, and CMake has matured quite a bit. I think CMake has more churn. I worry about that, but I would like to standardize on 1 build system. And one of the problems too is we're not just maintaining 2 build systems. We also have these kind of awkward hacks to try and keep parity between the 2 build systems. For example, if you look inside of our configuration stuff, we try to maintain consistent warning flags across all platforms. And so the way that we do this is we have these warning files that are inside like new warnings, right? And so we have all these files here, and they're just text files that have the warnings in there, and we consume these inside the auto tools and CMake. and paste these in, and this is how we generate the warnings that we use for different compiler versions. Well, this is kind of awkward for both systems, and it makes it harder for it's less maintainable. It's hard to bring new people in who are familiar with the one system because they have to understand our weird hacks. So so I'd like to get rid of a lot of this and just kind of standardize on CMake, come up with one way of building HDF5 and just maintain that going into the future. I wouldn't backport this to older systems. So if somebody, I don't think this is going to go into 1.14. This is something that we would do in HDF5 2.0. So if somebody were building with 1.14, we wouldn't rip the auto tools out from underneath them, or 1.10 or something like that. We would continue to support the existing build systems going forward. It's just that new development would not have the auto tools. So that's one of the things. I have a forum post on here, and it's received 0 comments but 4 likes. So right now it looks like people are voting for not having the auto tools, although this is not a scientific poll by any means. So, and when I've asked people in the past that have said that they wanted the auto tools are now telling me that CMake is fine. That, you know, I think many ECP systems have standardized on CMake. I think SPAC stuff all uses CMake. So I feel like the auto tools are kind of, which is kind of sad for me because I've always been an auto tools user. So now I have to go mess around more with CMake. So I feel everybody else's pain if they're an auto tools person, but I do feel the benefit of having just one build system outweighs my my developer needs. One of the other things that that could even be removed in the 1.14 line is file locking. So this was added in 1.10 at the same time that we introduced Swimmer. And if I remember correctly, it's been a long time, but the impetus for this was that now we're telling people that you can have a writer in the mix of all your various readers. So maybe we should have a file locking scheme to try and help people get the Swimmer, you know, ordering and semantics correct. And so we added this in, and over the years, it has been, I don't know how many people this has helped, but I know that a lot of people have complained about this. And we've added a number of hacks to switch it off. There's an environment variable that you can set. There's configure options. There's now you can set a property in the property list. And so this has grown from something that was kind of a quick and dirty hack to keep people from doing stuff like opening a file with 2 different writers into something that has non-trivial code maintenance, especially given the number of people who trip over it, because it's one of those parts of POSIX that's not well specified, where there's a lot of variability. And so and you know, and it's not even really an operating system thing as much as a file system thing. And so different file systems have different ideas about how file locking works. File locking is weird on NFS. It's often switched off on parallel file systems. So it's kind of a big problem. But it's hard for me to gauge whether or not this is like how many people are being helped by this. Are people actually avoiding data corruption because we've made it difficult for people to open up a file with 2 writers? But at the same time, how many people have been turned off from HDF5 because they tripped over some aspect of file locking on some system? So it's an open question. One thing I did do is in the past couple months is I wrote this file locking in HDF5. It's in the HDF5 repository. It's in doc. We put a lot of we're starting to put markdown documents in here that are kind of more developer level things. User level documentation we put in Doxygen, and this will probably wind up in the user's guide in Doxygen in the future, but I just put this in there right now for the people who are kind of more into the edge cases and the weeds. But I wrote it. This is a very detailed description of the existing scheme, how it works, exactly all the things we do. It's got this giant matrix in here that shows you when we actually implemented all the various hacks and workarounds, so people can see how this is going to work, the different things you can set it to. Because we have stuff where we'll try to use the file locks, but we disable them if we detect an error that might be due to file locking being disabled on your file system. So it's very, very, very complicated. I'm not a big fan of these sharp edges like this that to me, this feels like this probably belongs in user land, right? This is like trying to engineer around telling people don't delete files, right? Like in me, like making an API that has a box that says, are you sure you want to do that? Click OK, right? Like at a certain point, like we're really a file format construction kit. And I feel at the C library level, like the C philosophy is you kind of know what you're doing, right? And so we should let people know what they're doing and let people handle that at the application level. So so this is a question, and I did not put a thing on the forum yet. I was going to put a post out here, but I don't really get a whole lot of responses. So and I was going to create a blog post for this and have it go out in the newsletter and see if I can get responses from that and talk to some of the people. But people that I've talked to have not really seemed to care that much about the file locking. So if it disappeared, I don't think they would be that sad. I did look in if you look in the forum and search in here, there's actually like, oh, it's even still there. If you look in the file locking, there's some, because since we imported all our old stuff, there's stuff from a long time ago where people were corrupting their files and implementing or trying to implement lock schemes. So this is definitely a concern for some people, but yeah, it's hard for me to gauge how much people actually care about this because a lot of our users are silent, right? There's a few people here now. I know the customers that we often work with, but HDF5 is used in so many places that it's really difficult for us to get in touch with people and really gauge like how angry people are going to be if I get rid of something that was implemented. I mean, Quincy's here. Quincy, do you have a feeling for how people are going to take it if I remove the auto tools or if I remove the file locking scheme?
It depends, right? Certain environments, it's really important. Well, it's a standard software engineering answer, right? Yeah, certain environments like swimmer and things like that, you really do want some safeguards. But in other places, like you've said, the parallel environments are like, no, man, I know what I'm doing. So I think it's probably a right idea, but needed another level of refinement. Maybe an environment, it spits out an error that says, hey, you did the funny thing, and here's the easy way to run this with an environment variable. But that sucks if you submitted your job, waited 6 hours in the queue, and it's 2 a.m. and it spits this out at you.
Right. Yeah. And we've tried to refine the file locking stuff. I mean, what you see now in the current develop and 110 is a result of our many years of experience with people complaining about how the file locking system has impacted them and how they would like to disable it. And we've pretty much given them all the knobs that they need to turn it off, regardless of what level they're operating at. I mean, did somebody else build their library? Okay, we've got the property list. You can turn it off that way, right? Did somebody else write the software, right? Like you've got the environment variable. You turn it off that way, right? Like are you building the library and you don't want anybody to trip over it because you know it's running on a system that has the locking disabled and everyone's just going to get mad at you, you can use the configure option and get rid of it. There's a lot of stuff for it. And I think the documentation that we have now, in the past, I feel like one of our problems was that we did not have the right level of the right amount of documentation for what is actually a complicated problem. It's just I don't think this is an abstraction that we can easily paper over. I think that it's the nature of if there was a POSIX like specification for locks that every file system that wanted to be a POSIX file system had to implement, then it would be something I think that would be more tractable. But since it's basically the Wild West, right? Like some people use flock locks, some people use F control locks. Sometimes the flock locks are F control locks. I mean, it's so complicated.
Right. And I think we started from a position, well, I mean, the canonical problem in like multi-threaded stuff is you don't try to upgrade from a read-only lock to a reader-writer lock because that's bad. And what we had here was a weak position that we tried to strengthen in that analogy. And then that just broke all the use cases where people had assumed and worked around the existing behavior. So had we started with a strong position, people would have been happy and safer from the very beginning and asking us to weaken it, and that would have been the right way to go. But reversing it, I think, tactically causes problems, and it's just troublesome. Yeah, maybe it's something we impose at a an optional, opt-in kind of mechanism.
Right. That's one of the things I thought
Easy
about
way,
doing is basically having like the file locking operation be a no op.
Mhm.
Unless you actually explicitly say, turn the locking stuff on. But then,
Right. Need the
I mean,
seatbelt, right.
but then I feel like the problem is that a lot of people who don't know what they're doing, because HDF5 is middleware. People make middleware out of our middleware, and and how do they know how to expose all that stuff or what to do for people? Because you don't want naive users to shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah,
So,
but like you say, this is C, and you're supposed
Yeah.
to know what you're doing if you're going to use it. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I'm thinking like, I could remove it in 114. I'd like to because it's a pain to support, but then I'm worried that I'm going to get a whole bunch of people complaining that they've corrupted their files.
Yeah, now you're waffling.
Right, yeah. Now I've got a different problem. I mean, technically, it's not my problem anymore. It's somebody else's problem, but that's not really a good thing to inflict on our users. What about the auto tools? Do you have any feeling for that? Like how that's changed over time? I mean, I feel like more people have gotten into CMake. That now, especially I think that most of the ECP stuff is SPAC plus CMake, and so that's kind of just the thing that everybody's standardizing on.
Yeah, I think the balance has tipped quite a bit there, and CMake has improved enough that it's a reasonable choice at this point. Yeah.
I don't think I'm gonna do it for 114. I think that's too big of a change for. I mean, right now we're in the last month before we release 114, and something that big hasn't shown up in any of the release candidates in our experimental releases. So I feel like that'd be a big surprise this spring on people at the last minute. So it'd probably be a HDF5 2.0 feature. So maybe after we create the 114 branch, we'll get rid of it. So we got 3 minutes left. Does anybody have questions?
Dana,
Yeah.
yes, I had a quick question. I didn't think this was exactly 2.0 material, but I'm curious if the user-defined functions that were presented by Lucas, are they on the roadmap for inclusion in the official distribution?
I don't, but I can add that to the list of things. I mean, what I have for my list of HDF5 2.0 stuff is future HDF5 stuff, really. And so we're gonna pick out of that, and we're gonna put that into the list of 2.0 features, and then everything else goes back in the pot. And then when it's HDF5 3.0 time, then we implement that. And then those are things that can get implemented there, or things that can be added in a minor release if they don't change the API in ways that break binary compatibility.
Yes. Okay. It did seem like it was a little bit far-reaching for what you were considering for 2.0, but the UDFs themselves seem very promising and interesting in terms of putting it into the official release. But I didn't know if it was receiving any consideration.
Yeah, it's something that I had on my list. I'm gonna add that though after this meeting. I know other formats like the Fusion people. They have a format that does user-defined functions and stuff. So it's definitely a thing that is available in other formats. One of the things that I really want to do for, if we're going to implement something that is a major under the hood code change, one of the things that I feel really needs a lot of attention is variable length data. Is that we do not do variable length data well because of the way that it kind of mixes up data and metadata under the hood. And so that we have an RFC for that. And so I think that's one of the things we may dust off in the spring and pass around and then try to find some. That seems like it's a problem with I'm gonna say a kind of a known solution that we could implement. I feel like that's a thing that we could bite off and perform over say the summer, and then in the fall release an HDF5 2.0.
Yes.
Depending on resources. Love to see. It's open source software, so it's hard to tell.
And I guess I had just one nuts and bolts question. Between 112 and 114, are you dropping any compilation systems, or are those going to remain the same?
No, in general, I mean, we try to keep that kind of constant because it really reflects what we build and test on.
Okay.
There's some stuff that we generally sometimes we don't push around, right? Like for example, C++ 11, right? Like we only kept that at a certain level and we didn't push that. I think we did actually push that to 112. I can't remember, but we try to not alienate people with older compilers. That's kind of like what we worry about when we're pushing stuff downstream. Because usually build system stuff like that is pretty easy to move around. Our build system files across 110, 12, and develop are pretty close. And I don't think that's going to change a lot, even if we go to HDF5 2.0. I mean, we get rid of some the auto tool stuff and the common stuff would get folded back into CMake, but I feel like the general build structure is about the same. So it'd be easy to move that stuff around. But usually that stuff, like in terms of systems that we support, that's usually what systems do we have available for building and testing so that we can claim we tested. And for Microsoft, it's we try to move the bar up a little bit more aggressively because Microsoft, starting in around 2013, decided they were going to actually support C as opposed to just C++. And so their C99 and 11 compliance got significantly better and gets better every time they have a release. So we are trying to push that up a little more aggressively because we want to be able to build with ANSI C and not have a lot of hacks in the library to paper around Microsoft's older decisions to neglect C. So.
Okay, because I think Microsoft has dropped Visual Studio 2017. It's now off the back. So I didn't know if it was going to be continued to be part of the HDF supported build systems.
I feel like for the most part, once we got into 2015, then there's good enough support to do most things that we do in the library.
Okay.
So I wouldn't worry as much about that. It's not that we like do crazy stuff that Microsoft will find hard to support. Trying to think of like what sorts of things do they have coming down the pipe that the only thing I can think of is that I know that their support for some atomic stuff is not great. And so there might be multi-threaded changes that come in the future that relied on things like that. And so that may require a better C compiler in the future. In fact, I think, if I remember correctly, Microsoft even now doesn't support some stuff. I have to go look, but yeah, normally that hasn't been too much of a problem. Once we got to about 2015, that had enough for us to do the things we need to do. Anything else? Oh, Greg's here. I could ask Greg. Hey, Greg, if we remove the auto tools, would the Trilabs be upset?
No, we're primarily CMake. So.
Okay. Yeah, I thought the Trilabs were mostly on CMake these days. Okay, well, that's 4 minutes past the hour. We're all set.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
And if you have any ideas, if you want to contribute, if you have things you want to add to this, there's these forum posts exist, so they'll be up for quite some time. So eventually, I'm just going to keep the thing there, and maybe I'll make a new one that says, "What do you want to see in HDF5 3.0?" But yeah, maybe with a link to the list of all the stuff that we've compiled out of the existing post, right? So it'll be kind of a rolling list that just keeps going.
Okay.
Great. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll stop sharing here, and we are done. All right. Bye, everyone.